Hey everyone, we're just about ready to get started. So excited to see you today. And, I know we're talking about the breath today, and you're like, well, what does breath have to do with a strong pelvic floor or with leaking? But it has everything to do with it. So we'll be talking about breathing today. And looks like we're just about ready to get started. So I have a little slide here, just a little reminders on things I want you to get out of today's sharing. So close that up a little bit here. Good. And yeah. So today, talking about breathing. So with breathing and the pelvic floor, and I've taught this before and I teach it quite in, I have a whole module on breathing. So if you're interested in my course, we get a lot more in depth with it. But a couple questions. One is, are you a backwards breather? So what does a backwards breather mean? Well, on your inhale, it is actually your diaphragm drops, right? As your ribs expand, as your lungs expand. But also, your belly pooches out and your pelvic floor drops because it needs more room for your internal organs, right? So from there, when you exhale, everything lifts. The pelvic floor lifts, the belly comes in, and the diaphragm lifts. Well, what we found, especially in teaching yoga and pelvic floor yoga, that many people are backwards breathers. They breathe opposite to what I just described. So you might want to check that out, practice, put your hand on your belly, see when you inhale what happens and exhale what happens, and see if you are a backwards breather. You can reverse and become, normal with the body as far as breathing. You can turn things around, to use a euphemism, but you can turn things around. So find out if you're a backwards breather. Let me know in the chat. Are you a backwards breather? You can do something about it. So we're going to be talking a little more about the breath. And in yoga, it's called pranayama. The breath is called pranayama. And it's a big part of the 8 limbs. It's one of the main limbs of yoga. There's 8 limbs, and that pranayama is one of them because it's very important in our practice of yoga. But breath is really important in our lives. When you think about it, you don't really have to think it. It's automatic, right? It's something you can control, the breath. But then if you don't think about it, it happens automatically because your body, has a natural breath that you don't have to think about all the time. It automatically happens to give you life force. So breath is the life force of the body, right? If you don't have air, right? If you're underwater, if you're up in space, what do you have to have? Oxygen. If you have lung or heart or lung problems, you have to have an oxygen tank to help. So it's our life force. It's what keeps the body alive. You need that oxygen. And we're in this beautiful earth that has the perfect combination of air for us to live on. And you think about it, people breathe anytime, approximately between 15,000, 20 some thousand breaths per day. And a lot of it has to do with the way your body temperament is, where you're built, or, you may have trained your body to not have to inhale and exhale as much as maybe other people, depending on your physical health, depending on your age, depending on your whole body structure. So, you can measure it. You can count your breaths, time it for a minute, see how many breaths you take every minute, and you can tell, you can multiply that by 60, and then by 24, and so you can figure out how many breaths per minute you take. But we study, and it is, pranayama is the life force of the body. Now, we talked about the rate of breath. Now, one thing about the rate of breath is you can control the rate of breath. And that's one thing, pranayama, the breath, this life force, you can use it with your body, you can use it with your mind. So the first thing, and a lot of breath practices can help with if you're anxious or if you feel sad or depressed. There are breathing practices for getting you warmer. There's breathing practices for getting you cooler. There's breathing practices for all kinds of things that go on in your life, anxiety, stress. There's breathing practices that have been created from, through yoga from, thousands of years ago that people have learned over time what can really, really help with anything going on in the mind. So you think about it, if you try, maybe you want to try now, is to go ahead and take an inhale. Think about the inhale. Take a deep inhale through the nose and then exhale out the nose. Inhale through the nose and exhale out the nose. Sorry, that's my sister's dog. She's a basset. Anyway, you can hear her barking in the background. Anyway, so a couple things. One breath, they like to call the equilibrium breath. I teach that breath work, especially in my free 5-day course. And also I teach it in my modules in my yoga for pelvic floor course. Breathing is so important. And we use a lot of different breathing practices. And most yoga practices, they may have one that they really concentrate on, like integral yoga has a kapalbhati that they use and alternate nostril breathing. In Kundalini yoga, they use a breath of fire where it's a pumping action of the breath. And, every practice has different breathing practices. A vinyasa practice, you're breathing in and doing a motion and breathing out on a motion. So that every yoga practice is maybe focus on one or more, but you can take classes and just have do different breathing practices. And I usually recommend try several because not every breathing practice works for different situations. But let's just go ahead and we'll do one breathing practice, it's called a 4-square breath, and it's actually used by people in the military if they get stressed. I know specifically like Navy SEALs because they're underwater and you don't want to be using up all your oxygen. And it's called a 4-square breath, and you inhale for 4, you hold the breath for 4, you exhale for 4, and then hold without the breath for 4. And you just think about it. It's just going up and down in a square. Now, I can talk you through it, but you know your body. So again, and check with your doctor. Some people doing a breathing practice that's not just a regular in and out may be a problem for them. But let's try it. So we're going to inhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, hold the breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale the breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then hold without the breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can do it at your own pace, but just think about a square. You're going up the square one side, you're inhaling, you're holding the breath at the top, you're exhaling to the bottom, and then you're holding. And maybe you're like, well, I can only do it for like a count of 2. As long as they are the same, and you could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's probably better, but count. And then maybe as you practice it, you can go a little slower. So try that, that might be something. It's a good stress reliever to bring. So if you're feeling anxious or stressed, it's one breath practice that I teach, but it doesn't work for everybody. There's multiple breath practices for different situations. Again, for breath for the pelvic floor, we use the breathing, especially getting our pelvic floor moving with the diaphragm. So especially if you're, like I talked about, a backwards breather. And then the other way we use the breath is for if you have urge incontinence, if you have to run to the bathroom, or situations where you hear water, or you open the door and all of a sudden you have to go to the bathroom when you did 2 seconds or 10 seconds ago, or got out of the car just because you got out of the car, or maybe being out in the cold from a warm room. That could be another situation. And those really aren't physical. They're because you didn't have to go to the bathroom 10 minutes ago. If your bladder was full and you felt it before the situation happened, that's a different story. But if all of a sudden you have to go and you didn't 10 seconds ago, that usually has to do with the nervous system. And so I teach how to use the nervous system with the breathing practices and visualization to calm the bladder down, because usually it gets in, maybe it just gets the bladder, starts tensing, or it, the nervous system just says, this happened, it's time to go to the bathroom. Water's running, it's time to go to the bathroom. You open the door. So you've taught your nervous systems that in certain situations, even if you didn't have to go, when the situation happens, it's time to go to the bathroom. So we talk a lot about that in my modules too. So that's can be controlled with the breathing practice. So we actually use breathing practices for those situations. So that's how it connects all with the pelvic floor. So the breath over mind over body. So you think about your breathing, and you can use, we said, a breathing practice to actually help with any emotional things going on, any thoughts. You can actually maybe turn off the thoughts by thinking about just saying the word breathing in and breathing out. So if there's thoughts in your mind that you're observing that you don't want those thoughts in your mind, you can actually use the breath over mind. So when you can control the mind, right, then the mind controls the body, right? So we talked about that. If you can control the mind, that nervous system, it will tell the bladder, okay, you don't really have to go to the bathroom now just because you heard running water, or because you opened the bathroom door, or because you got out of your car. So you can use that breath, helps control the mind, and then the mind can control those bodily functions. So does that make sense? Do you have any questions up to this point? All right. So we talk about the mind follows the breath, then the mind comes over the body, right? And then this over here, your breath can actually change your life, right? So because breath over mind, mind over body, if you can have control over those two things, right, you can change you. So it follows, you change the breath, you change the person you are. So I can give you an example. So let's get an example. Maybe there was a situation that somebody said something to you that all of a sudden it brought thoughts in of maybe just even shock or anger, or said something to make you upset. I always suggest, before saying anything, or before that emotion gets really a hold of you, take a deep breath and an exhale. And let that breath help you to observe what's going on in the mind. Either you can look at the emotion, you can even calm the body. Let's say somebody said something and your body just tensed, right? You can take that breath, inhale, a relaxing breath, or use one of the breath practices that work for you, and be able to observe what's going on in the body, observe the thoughts going on in the mind, and maybe helps you step back a little. So that's an example of how the breath can change you. If you are usually react to a situation, it could help you be less reactive, maybe even non-reactive, maybe calm in the situations when these things happen. The thing I love about the breath and pranayama practice, it gives you a moment. I've even suggested to folks that have, maybe they get angry quickly in a situation, you could excuse yourself and just say, hey, I've got to use the bathroom. I'll be right back. Maybe you don't really go into the bathroom, take deep inhales and exhales, or whatever breathing practice works for you, and then come back to the situation. But most people, if you have a space or a moment, or maybe they keep talking, they don't know you are controlling the breath. They're just looking at you, or maybe they're not even looking at you. They won't be able to tell that you are doing a breath practice while they're talking to you in most cases. So a breath practice gives you time to find out what's going on in the mind, to observe any thoughts, observe your reactions, observe what's going on in the body. And it actually can make a change in your whole life, maybe whatever situations you've been in. So try it. And I'd love to hear, your comments, if there's anything that, that you have found that works for you. Like I said, I've got another workshop coming up in December, and we're going to be talking about some different breathing practices. And I get more in depth in the course I teach, yes, with the breath. So let's talk another situation. Like I said, let's take a situation where, let's say every time you get it out of a car, or if you're traveling, every time you stop at a gas station and you didn't really, maybe you had to go to the bathroom, but not really. All of a sudden you beeline it out of the car straight to the bathroom in the gas station, because all of a sudden, and you think, I am not going to make it. I didn't really have to go to the bathroom that bad, and all of a sudden I have to go. So in this case, maybe you have taught yourself every time you pull in for gas, you have to go to the bathroom. Maybe there's other situations. I tell a story about, I hadn't been to a certain grocery store in years and years and years. And I went back and I went to this grocery store that I hadn't been to in a while. And they have, just where you can check your self-checkout. And I got into there, and all of a sudden, I didn't have to go to the bathroom. All of a sudden, I had this urge to go. And I'm thinking, why all of a sudden at the checkout do I have to go to the bathroom? I'm crossing my legs. What's going on? Then I started my breathing practices that I've learned and got my bladder to stop spasming. And then I thought, what did something happen in the past? And I just remember that I had a leaking accident right at that grocery store. But years ago, before I learned about pelvic floor yoga, before I learned, how to create a strong pelvic floor, and how to use breath for a spasming or urge incontinence. So yeah, it's just a different story. But let's say, in that situation, so that was the situation I was in, and I just stopped, and I'm like observed, like, oh, all of a sudden I have an urge to go. Why is that? And before I got into all the thinking why, I figured that out later, but I started my breathing practices. I started observing what was going on in my body. And as I was doing that and using visualization, which is another thing I teach, urge, and my body relaxed, and my bladder said, oh, okay, I guess you don't have to go to the bathroom now. And then I was able to relax, check out at the checkout, and I didn't really have to go to the bathroom. I didn't go rush to the bathroom because I really didn't have to go. It was just all of a sudden that situation, my body said, hey, it's time to go to the bathroom. But it wasn't, and it was just that individual grocery store. So it's not in every grocery store checkout line. All right, well, that's all I have to talk about today. I hope you come with questions anytime.